Hello, everybody. Good afternoon and good morning. This is Monica Larner with the Wine Advocate, and welcome to another edition of the Italian Wine Series. Today we will be speaking with Léon Femfert of Fattoria Nittardi, an estate in Castellina in Chianti, in, of course, the beautiful Chianti Classico appellation. So I'm very excited. We'll see if Léon is here. Here he is. View request to go live. Hi, everybody. I see everybody joining in from everywhere. It's great to have you as always. There he is. Hello.
Hi, Monica. How are you?
Hi, Léon. How are you?
All good, all good.
All good, yeah?
Yes. I'm trying to see. I'm not so used to the live thing on Instagram.
Well, you look great. The lighting is good. Everything looks good, yeah?
Okay. Great.
Great. So listen, thank you so much for joining me today on this Instagram Live. I'm very excited because recently I've been doing a lot of work on Chianti Classico in our reports for the Wine Advocate. And my intention was to present the wines by comune or by village or by subzone, communal subzone in Chianti Classico. So I wrote all my reports and I tasted all my wines according to that criteria. And it was important to me because this is something that we have been discussing in Chianti Classico for a long time, to give greater identity to the villages, to the comune, to then be able to create a better identity of the terroir and of the differences in Chianti Classico, which actually is a very complicated and intricate wine region with many different facets and many different expressions.
Yes.
Obviously, as a wine writer, it's a lot of fun to be able to dive in and learn a little bit more about it. Your estate is actually one of the, I would say, boutique estates extraordinaire, because it's been a presence for so many years, and also in a very interesting way that we'll talk about, not only for the wines, but because of a great sense of aesthetic that you and your family has always showed. And it's something that I find fascinating, because wine and the arts has always walked hand in hand, and you have been probably some of the most successful in Italy to be able to forge this identity. So before we go on, let me ask you to give us a little bit of history of Fattoria Nittardi. Start off with the basics, and then we'll take it from there.
Okay, great. Yeah. So yes, as you said, we are in Castellina in Chianti, so really in the middle of the Chianti Classico area. Castellina is a commune which belongs to Siena, but we are just on the border with Florence. So our neighbors are already Panzano, which belongs to Greve and is Florence, while we are still in Siena, Castellina. Right. And my parents started the winery exactly 40 years ago in 1981. And my father is German and my mother is Italian. My mother's from Venice, but she studied in Florence, and this is when she fell in love in the 70s with Tuscany. And after studying in Florence, she met my father, so they got married, and my father already had an art gallery in Germany, in Frankfurt. So after marrying in 1979, she moved to Frankfurt to live with my father. And I think it was a different period than today. Germany was much colder, maybe also a little bit more sad, a bit more trist. Oh. So after one year of marriage, my mother said, "Look, Peter, I love you. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, but I don't want to spend the rest of my life in Germany." So my father, who still is today very much in love with my mom, said, "Okay, I love this woman. I will never find a woman like her again. We have to do something." And he was a very big wine fan already in the 70s. And so they started to look for a winery in Chianti Classico. And Chianti Classico was a very different region than it is today. And in 1981, rather by chance, they found Nittardi. and it was the first vintage we started to produce. The house itself and the winery itself is much older. The house is a building from the Middle Ages. We have two houses, and the main house is from the 12th century, and it was called Villa Nittardi in the Middle Ages, exactly. And there were Benedict monks producing wine at Nittardi. Right. So we have a document.
God of the nectars.
Yes. So, but it's not a marketing gimmick.
It really was.
It's really the name of the state.
It was ordained as such. It was ordained. I visited many years ago, and I have a memory of flowers, of just the beauty of the colors and the flowers and the gardens, and I mean, absolutely spectacular house and place.
Thank you. I have to tell you later a memory I have. The first time I met you. It's a bit of, I don't know if I should tell this on a live, but it was very, very funny. So it's a long time ago. I am 37 now, so it is maybe 20 years ago. And it was one of the first events I attended, one of the first wine events. It was the collection in Florence at the Chianti Classico in Florence,
right?
And you were working for a different magazine at the time, and I was sitting. There was a dinner, and I was sitting next to you at the dinner. Really, maybe 20 years ago, or maybe 15 years ago. I'm not sure. Anyway, and I was the whole evening. I didn't say one word. I remember because I was like the first time at a wine event with all these people, and I didn't know what to say. Anyway,
and I'm sure I was like,
No, it was nice. It was a nice evening.
That was anyway. In fact, those events were what shaped my whole career, because there was a time, I guess now with coronavirus we can't even think about it, but when there were so many wine events, and every region was promoting their wines, and so these journalists, young journalists like me, we had this amazing opportunity to taste and meet people and go out and visit estates. So it just created this whole big, this baggage of knowledge that I've been able to amass over the years.
That's great. Yeah.
Listen, so I see some people. I see a lot of people that we know. Giuseppe is here, my favorite viewer, and Giuseppe Sommelier, and I see all the people from Turner PR as well. Hello, everybody. And I saw some other producers from Chianti Classico as well. So hello, benvenuti. So listen, so if anybody has any questions throughout this, please go ahead and ask any questions. I did see someone say hello from Sweden. So as I do every week, please go ahead and tell us where you're viewing from, what country, from Texas, hello, where you're watching us from, and I'll try to write everybody down and say hello back, which is always a great pleasure to see where people are connecting from.
Great,
listen,
yeah.
So Ecco, Giuseppe. Listen, so we discussed a little bit at the intro this connection to art, and this is something that I wanted to get into. So first of all, there's even as you were describing, you introduced the element of love, right? So there's love, the love between your parents, wine, and art. But first I wanted to know, why exactly choose the Chianti Classico region? What was it in 1981 that that gave them that they wanted to go there for that particular part of?
No, honestly, I think, like many decisions in life, especially when you're younger, there was no rational decision taking. There was no piece of paper where we said, okay, shall we go to Spain or shall we go to Chianti Classico? There was nothing like that. As I was mentioning, my mother, she studied history in Florence. And afterwards, my grandmother had a pharmacy in Venice. So the side of my grandmother is from Venice, and she had this pharmacy in Venice, and she was buying the honey in Castellina in Chianti. No idea why, but already in the 70s she was buying the honey in Castellina. So when she went to Castellina to get the honey for the next 6 months, she talked to the guy who has the bees, the bee, I don't know how it's called in
Right, the
English.
beekeeper,
The beekeeper, and told him, look, my daughter, my oldest daughter, she's looking for a place in Tuscany, very generic, in Tuscany. And the beekeeper said, I know about this estate, Nittardi. It belonged to Swiss people, because there was a period in Chianti Classico where a lot of houses and estates were belonged to Swiss people who mainly bought in the 50s, just after the war, when the prices were really, really low, and all the contadini, all the workers were leaving the countryside and to work in the cities. And in this period, there was a lot of people from Switzerland who bought estates, and my parents then bought from them in '81. So it was really a casual, no, how do you say, it was by chance.
By chance.
I would really say, yes.
Because I mean, in 1981, you know, it was really at the beginning of so much of, you know,
Yes.
what we recognize as, you know, modern Italian wine. You know, that's only 10 years after Tignanello, for example.
Exactly.
Or,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, it's quite at the beginning. And of course, Chianti Classico had a different reputation and a different, you know, even stylistically, obviously very, very, very different. So, yeah.
You were asking about the art.
Yes, I was just going to jump back into it. Yes.
No, go. Sorry.
No, so I was going to ask. So obviously, so there's such a, you guys have made such an incredible connection between art and wine, of course, with labels that are distinctive and changed by artist. You know, I mean, obviously, this is something that's used by other great chateaux as well, but in Italy, maybe a little bit less so. I guess maybe. And so I'm wondering what was the inspiration for that, and tell us a little bit about the program, because the artists have been quite incredible,
so
varied.
Well, so the reasons are basically two. So I was mentioning that the estate was called Villa Nectar Dei in the Middle Ages, and it was then purchased in Renaissance period in 1549 by Michelangelo Bonarotti. So Michelangelo is a famous Florentine artist. He started his career in Florence, but then he moved to Rome, where he worked for the Vatican, and where he spent then most of his life, and where he earned quite a bit of money working for the church. And then he had the chance to buy Nittardi from the church. So while he was painting the 16th chapel, he purchased Nittardi, which at the time was an estate which was a little bit bigger than what we have today. So there were different houses. And we bought then the two main houses in 1981. So the idea to make for one wine an artist label, every year a different artist paints two paintings. One painting is for the label, and a second painting is for the wrapping paper. So this is also a little bit particular, in difference with other artistic projects like Mouton, of course, and other projects a little bit all around the world, is that the artist always paints two paintings. And the idea started a little bit to tell the story of Nittardi, to give homage to Michelangelo, to show, because for us, I think wine is, of course, about what is in the bottle, and about all what wine, but it's a lot about conviviality. It's a lot about the experience that you have when you share a bottle of wine with other people. And I think that the label makes a rather important impact on the experience you have when you share a bottle of wine on a table with other people. And then finally, my father has been working in the art business for over 40 years. So he has an art gallery in Germany since 1979. So obviously art has always been a big part of our life. And so it was very natural from the beginning to combine these two big passions that we have in my family.
Well, they are certainly some of the most distinctive labels, you know, gorgeous, very beautiful. And you're right, having you know, the bottle on the table certainly changes the whole mood around the table because of the, you know, the colors and being able to discuss the art and whatnot. Very beautiful. So if anybody is not familiar with the wines of Fattoria Nittardi, I definitely suggest you seek them out. And in fact, Leon, we just had someone ask, where are your wines available? Which is a big question, but
Yes. So we are, as you were saying, we are a boutique winery. We have about 35 hectares, which is 70 acres. Roughly half is in Chianti Classico, and the other half is in Maremma. So in the late 90s, my parents started a project in Maremma. We first purchased a piece of land in 99, and then in 2000, we planted the first vines. In the southern, Maremma is the southern part, the coastal part of Tuscany. But normally when you talk about Maremma, you speak about the southern coast of Tuscany. And so we are in the Morellino di Scansano sub-appellation, and there we produce a white and 2 reds. And in Chianti Classico, we produce 3 different red wines, 3 Chianti Classicos. And so we produce roughly in total 150,000 bottles. And we sell it in 25, 30 countries, roughly. So I was seeing that somebody was asking.
Yes, I was just going to say.
We are in the UK. We are in the UK. We are in. I would say we are in many of the main markets which are important for Italian wine. So of course, US, Canada, and then most countries of Europe, and in Asia, which has been a quite exciting market for us. We are in China and Japan, in Singapore, in Korea, in Hong Kong, and yeah.
So well spread out. Leon, do you have a
but
bottle?
Small quantities in all countries. That's a bit our philosophy. Yes.
Do you have a bottle with you to show? Somebody asked.
Yes. Well, I opened before. So this is the artist label. So the wine is called Casanova di Nittardi, and this is the 16 vintage. So it's a bit now. The current vintage is 2018, but I wanted to open the 16 tonight, so I opened the 16, which is a very good vintage.
A very good vintage.
Yes, I mean, probably everybody who is listening knows that 16 is a very celebrated vintage all over Tuscany. And this is by an English artist, Alan Jones. He's considered a British pop art artist. And yes, and this is a Casanova di Nittardi, which is the first wine my parents started to make in 1981. And since then, it has always the artist label and wrapping paper. And then in 85, we started to make a Riserva, which is still today our top wine, our most important wine. And the Riserva, and which is, so I would say the first maybe 3-4 vintages my parents started to make. We're still in the learning period, and 85 is the first real serious vintage which we made, and which is also a very, very good vintage in Tuscany. And if you find a bottle from Nittardi, but also from other wineries, 85, which is well kept still today, is
85 was a strange year, right? Because there was a famous frost that killed the olive trees, and the winter was very, very cold, right? That in the end, I mean, that was one of the peculiar parts of the vintage, that yields were reduced because of this extreme weather in the winter, so that eventually when the fruit started to mature and when the growing season came to an end, you had this, you know, what was left was just beautiful and very exciting. So, of course, there's some very famous wines from 1985 from Tuscany.
It's true, and it's similar actually to 97, which is one maybe of the most celebrated vintages of the 90s, where we also had frost in spring, and the yields were reduced also quite drastically. But it's one of the today it's one of the best vintages of the decade, probably.
Okay, so I see we have a couple of questions coming up, but before we get to the questions, I just want to say hello to everybody that that told us. I hope I got everybody. So I saw Sweden. Hello, Southern California, Bristol. Somebody wrote in from Mars, but now that we've landed on Mars, I'm sure that's quite possible. We have someone from Hawaii, aloha.
Wow.
Vancouver, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, Padova, Argentina. And somebody wrote in, I'm not sure if they were writing in from Iran, but somebody said
Wow.
that they were, I guess, from Shiraz, which I've actually had the great honor of visiting Iran and Shiraz. And I remember seeing in the market these grapes, these grapes, these beautiful grapes, and thinking, wow, this is really, the cradle of so much, of our winemaking culture comes from this part of the world. And, so hello to everybody. And so, listen, so you mentioned the Reserva from 1985 starting. And I see Mexico and Connecticut. Hello, everybody. And I wanted to ask, you are one of the states that has not decided to make a Grande Selezione wine. So just to kind of recap about, I guess about almost 10 years ago, so 2012 about, the consortium decided to create a new, in the pyramid of quality of Chianti Classico, Reserva was at the top, but they decided to create a new top wine called Gran Selezione. And the idea was to, obviously to push for greater quality in Chianti Classico, but also to allow for wines that could compete with Brunello and other appellations that were based on Sangiovese as well, that were showing a lot of success in the marketplace. So this new super category was created, and not everybody has followed this philosophy of creating a Gran Selezione. So I wanted to know your thoughts on that a little bit.
So you're right. In the beginning, there was a lot of people were very skeptic, and honestly, still we don't produce a Gran Selezione, but we talk more or less every day about it. Shall we do it? Shall we not do it? So it's a very it's a thing that there's a lot of discussions about it in my family, but generally speaking, many people are very happy about it. Many people hate it, basically. So my basic thought is we have been producing what we consider our best wine, which is the Reserva, since '85. And we put the best grapes in it and the most effort, and we take especially care of it, and so on. So what shall we do? Shall we take the Reserva label, cancel the word Reserva and write Gran Selezione, just change the label? I think that towards our fans, our consumers, it wouldn't be fair to put a higher price tag on it and just change the name. So, and then can we do a wine which is better than this? I mean, we are trying every year to make a wine which is better than the previous vintage, but for us, it's our Reserva. So maybe because we are a bit slow or a bit traditional, I don't know, but it's difficult for us just to start thinking to make a wine which is beyond our Reserva, which is the one where we put all our effort in. So, and then you were mentioning a little bit about the Gran Selezione. It's basically, the idea is that you have to age the wine for 6 months longer, which goes a little bit in the Brunello direction, basically. And then the grapes have to come all from vineyard estate. So the grapes, you can't buy wine or you can't buy grapes to make Gran Selezione, but which is still not, it's not a very clear indication because every winery has some vineyards, even if they buy most of the grapes. It's enough to have one vineyard where you make the Gran Selezione from. So it's a bit unclear. Maybe we'll do one in the future. Yes, maybe yes. But for now, we stick to our wines, and we do everything to promote our wines well and produce the wines with our labels good. And that was also a bit the bitter aftertaste which we got when the consortium started to promote the Gran Selezione, that we said, why don't you put the effort in something else? In Chianti Classico, we have this very long fight against generic Chianti, which uses a lot the image of Chianti Classico, but it comes from a much wider area, which with less quality control and less rules. So maybe as a small producer, I would prefer that Chianti Classico would invest more in distinguished Chianti Classico wines from Chianti wines, or to promote more subzones and to promote more a clear distinction. This is maybe the thing I, as a small producer who produces wine only from grapes from my vineyards, would wish most, that it's the consortium would be able to make clear to a consumer if a wine comes from the vineyard of the producer, or if the wine comes from a big bottler which buys in bulk from different producers and then just blends the wine. So, but as I said, maybe we'll do one in the future. What I would love to do, and what what we are trying to do, is to do like a late release. So a riserva, which instead of 3 or 4 years in the cellar between oak, concrete, and bottle age, we would like to release after 10 years, for example.
That's very exciting. Yeah, that's something that we're seeing more and more of. And these late releases, I'm seeing them a lot in Piemonte, with the Barolo and Barbaresco. And people are actually building new cellars, and actually changing their configuration of their entire workspace to be able to allow for the aging for 10 years of these late release wines. And you see it a lot in Montalcino as well. But it's something that's really exciting. And I think you're right. I mean, we had a question a moment ago about Gran Selezione. Is it made every year, or only the best vintages? And that question is actually quite good, because there's no real rule on, I mean, the producer gets to decide what they think is their best vintage. So you can make it every year if you'd like, or you can choose not to make it every year, if that helps to answer the question. But some of the Gran Seleziones are definitely, I can say this because I just finished tasting all the Chianti Classicos. You wonder why they're using the name Gran Selezione, because to be Gran Selezione, it really has to be something quite extraordinary. So if someone, like you suggested, previously made a Riserva and just changed the name, then the packaging has changed, but the wine itself, fundamentally is the same. So it's, it is, when used correctly, I can see how the tool is very important, but if used incorrectly, it creates confusion. We had Leon, two more questions that were kind of, in a way, related. First, do you consider yourself a modernist or a traditionalist?
That's a difficult question. I don't know. Honestly, I have no. I mean, no. So look, I think so. My father's German. My mother is from Venice, and I grew up between Germany and Italy. So I would lie. I mean, I would lie if I would say I'm a super traditionalist. But of course, I mean, I think for me today, wine is about the place where it comes from. I mean, for me, wine is about the people who make it and the place, basically. And so it's impossible. So the wine has always to tell a little bit where it comes from, and this brings you automatically in the traditional angle.
Realm.
So if I look a little bit at the winemaking and at the winemaking philosophy, we have been working, maybe I should mention that, we have been working with a consultant winemaker since 1990, for over 30 years, Carlo Ferrini. He's one of the leading winemakers, consulting winemakers in Italy, probably. And so we have been working with him for over 30 years. And if I look a little bit at the winemaking at Nittardi and at the date we pick and what kind of oak we use, how much new oak, and all these questions, I would say that there was a period in the 90s where we really had the foot on the gas, you would say, in Italy. So we were really trying to push a little bit. And I think that in the last 10 years, or so, we tried to go a little bit more easy on everything. So generally speaking, we pick a little bit earlier to keep more freshness, to keep more drinkability, then less extraction during fermentation. So shorter fermentation periods in general, less pump overs, less punch downs. And then a bit bigger oak, especially for Sangiovese, and not so long of oak aging, and more the final blend is always done in concrete, and then a little bit longer of bottle age, basically. So
yeah, so I mean, so this is like a kind of a progression that even Carlo himself, has very much followed over the years, of moving to 500-liter
yes.
puncheons and as you mentioned, slightly shorter extractions and maceration times and whatnot for trying to capture the elegance of the wine, the freshness, the beauty. So I mean, it's funny, that question about being a modernist or traditionalist becomes harder and harder to answer, because again, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you could, there were people that used small oak and people who use big oak, and now there are so many, ways that you can finesse in between. We had a question. Another question is whether or not your wines are IGT or DOC, and obviously you have both. So maybe you could give us a little bit of an idea of your portfolio of the different offerings. You mentioned Maremma, the 2 reds that you have there, and then of course the wines from the Chianti Classico appellation.
Yes. So in Chianti Classico, we have basically, so Nittardi itself, especially this is interesting for who is more familiar with the area. Castellina and Chianti, the commune of Castellina and Chianti is rather in the middle, slightly to the western part of the whole Chianti Classico area. And we are in the northern part of Castellina and Chianti. So Castellina has a rather well-known southern area where there are many of the big producers as well. So what is also interesting about Castellina is that we have some very, very big producers and some small producers. So we have in Castellina itself, we have kind of a micro Chianti Classico. So we have big producers which produce millions and millions of bottles, and we have Nittardi, which is medium small, and then we have a lot of really, really small producers as well. And we are in Castellina on the northern part of Castellina. So as I was mentioning, very close to Panzano. And it's a very wild area where we are. So a lot of forest, only dirt roads. So it's a real, if you arrive at Nittardi, most people think they are lost or they're in the wrong place because the dirt road is so long. And so this is where our main vineyards are in Chianti Classico. And then we have also a vineyard in the southern part of Castellina, facing basically Poggibonsi and Siena a little bit. And this area is called Villa Rosa. So we purchased in 2010 a vineyard there, very beautiful vineyard from the 60s. And in Villa Rosa, in this old vineyard, which is a field blend, so we have Sangiovese in this vineyard, but also other local grape varieties, Canaiolo, Colorino, Malvasia Nera, Cilieggiolo, Foglia Tonda. 8 different grape varieties in total, a little bit of white grape varieties, but mainly red. And there we produce a very fresh, very drinkable Chianti Classico called Bel Canto. And then at Nittardi, we produce the single vineyard, the Atterslev, Casanuova di Nittardi, and which is 100% Sangiovese. And then we produce the Riserva, which is also a single vineyard from a 500-meter high south-facing vineyard, where we have Sangiovese and a few rows of Merlot. So we always blend a little bit of Merlot. It's always between 3, 5, 7% into the blend. And these are the 3 wines we produce in Chianti Classico. In Maremma, we have a white, which is a Vermentino. Vermentino is this, for me, very interesting, upcoming grape variety, which is found a little bit all over the Mediterranean. So in Sardinia, in Corsica, in Liguria, even in southern France. So I'm always very proud that it's the only grape variety that the French are now starting to call with the Italian name, which is Vermentino, and not Roll, which would be the local,
like the French
name. Yeah. And then we produce 2 wines which are, maybe are a bit more modern, yes. So Ad Astra and Nectar Day, and they're basically 2 blends. Ad Astra is Sangiovese, and then Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc. And Nittardi is a Bordeaux blend with a rather important part of Petit Verdot. So in Maremma, when we started in 99, 2000, we started planting different grape varieties to understand what works best in the area. And for the red grape varieties, we are very, very happy with the Cabernet, but also with the Petit Verdot. So we have an important part of Petit Verdot.
So besides, of course, the grapes that are obviously different from, in Maremma and Chianti Classico, but just for people who are less familiar, of course, the Maremma is, closer to the Tyrrhenian Sea. It has, an incredible luminosity, light, sunshine reflected off the sea itself and from the land. There's warmth. The soils are a bit heavier. The altitudes are a bit lower, so you get more structure, more phenolic weight, more power in the wines just naturally. And then, of course, in Chianti Classico, especially in Castellina, even though you described the two different estates, Villarosa, and in the more classic area, closer to Panzano where you farm, there you have, slightly higher altitudes to push more freshness, more acidity. The elegance and the grace of the wine, the fabric of the wine is more delicate and more fine. So I noticed that someone a while ago asked about what makes a wine age. And if all wines age, not all of them age gracefully, of course. But if you do have the qualities such as acidity and the quality of the tannins, these are things that you look for in a wine to think, okay, this wine has the ability to age with time. But it's not just aging with time that's important, because any wine will withstand a certain amount of, any good wine will withstand a certain amount of time and age, but it's improving with age, actually tasting better with time that becomes the key. So, so I hope that answers that earlier question about aging. There's another question about the age of your vines for the Casanova di Nittardi. That's the question we have now. And then I wanted to get back and talk a little bit more about Castellina and the Comuni. So
yes,
let's talk about the vineyards. Oh, and also when we talk about the age of the vines, can you give us a little bit of an idea of your soils as well?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So about it's a question I get very often about the age of the vine. So we have vineyards, as I was mentioning, in Villarosa, which are 50 years, a little bit older than 50 years old. And well, that's a difficult question coming up there.
You're getting a lot today.
No, so let's try to answer the first question. So the oldest vines we have at Nittardi are about 50, 55 years old. And most of the vineyards are around 20 years old. So, and generally we always say the older the vines, especially if we look to France, but maybe also to the New World, in California, in Chile, it's often similar. That the older the vines, the better the grapes, the better the wine. And this is, of course, generally speaking, true. But historically, especially in the 50s, and the 60s, 70s, even 80s, Chianti Classico was an area where it was all about quantity, making easy to drink wines, which were very good with pizza, in the fiasco. So this means that the vineyards were planted also in this direction. So a lot of space between the different vines, very low density, and clones and selections of Massal selections of Sangiovese, which produce a lot of grapes per vine, so 2-3 kilos per vine. So in Chianti Classico, it's not always true that the best vineyards are the oldest vineyards. This is what I would like to communicate a little bit, that there was, starting from the 80s, the Consortio did a great work, but also many producers did a great work to look for the best clones and look for the correct density of vines, for higher density of vines. So for me, every new vineyard we plant, I believe it will produce better grapes than the previous vineyards because we have more experience in producing high quality wines, which maybe in comparison with other regions in the old world, we don't have the same experience in producing high quality wines.
You know, I have to laugh because before we started this live, I called Léon and we were discussing, you know, basically the topics, and I said, you know, a lot of the frequent questions we got are, you know, along this line, or, you know, people ask about vintages and whatnot. And Léon said, but do you get very technical questions? And I said, no, don't worry, nobody will ask you about the pH of your soils. And right. Johan Som just asked, what are the pHs of your soils in
So let's try not to make it too technical, but I would like to say something. You were asking about the soil. You were asking about the soil and the different soil types. And this is a very important, so the two important aspects to understand Chianti Classico, in my opinion, are the altitude of the vines. Because in difference with other regions, think Burgundy, first of all, where basically Côte d'Or, where all the vineyards have more or less the same altitude and have more or less the same eastern exposure. Chianti Classico is a very complex region with all exposures, of course, south, north, east, west, and altitudes which go from 200 meters maybe to 700 meters roughly. And we are, Nittardi is 450, 500 meters, which maybe 20 years ago was considered one of the highest estates. And today there are more and more wineries which are looking for vineyards to plant in 500, 600 meters plots. Yeah. So please.
Yeah, no, as Léon is saying, I mean, obviously with climate change, you know, finding the cooler growing spots become important. And Chianti Classico, because it's, you know, the entire region is kind of at the, you know, on the Apennine, you know, lower part of the Apennine chain of mountains and whatnot, all of the elevations are you know, as you said, range from around 350 to higher 450, 550. So I mean, it's there's always this exchange of day and nighttime temperatures. It's quite profound, and then the soils are very interesting because the two main you know, mineral rock types are Galestro and Alberese, which are, one is a schisty soil and one is a more calcareous, you know, limestone based.
Yes.
And in every region or every part of the appellation has different percentages of one or the other. And that's where you get these beautiful mineral notes and that precision and the sharpness of the wines. In Sangiovese, it just relates so well to those soils because, you know, Sangiovese gives its best when it has those kind of slightly cooler conditions and these and these wonderful soils that give it this definition and minerality. We had a couple of other questions. One is that this is we've seen it like twice or three times, asking about visiting your estate.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, currently in Italy, the situation is still rather dramatic. All restaurants are closed, and most shops are closed too. So it's probably not the best moment to visit now, but I hope that starting from May, April will still be a tough month in Italy, I believe. But I hope starting from May, things will open up, and absolutely, we'd love to have guests and show us around our estate. We have a rather big sculpture garden as well at Nittardi. With about 35 different sculptures from artists a little bit from all over the world, and then of course taste the different wines. Yeah, absolutely.
So hopefully soon we can start to visit.
Yes, I think in Italy things will be nice again in summer, before summer. I mean, I know that in the US you're a bit better in getting the vaccine to everybody.
Yeah, I just had my vaccine the day before yesterday. In fact, yesterday I was it was even today I didn't feel 100%, but you know.
Okay. Yeah, no, no.
Listen, I know that you farm organically. We also had a question about your favorite vintages, some of your favorite vintages at Fattoria Nittardi, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about your decision to use the bio-organic farming protocols.
So organic for me is a decision which is, it helps, in my opinion, it helps. I don't know if it helps to make better wines. I mean, what is better wines anyway? I mean, I think you are better in answering this than I am. But for me, it helps to produce wines which are more precise and which tell better the story from where they come from. This is for me about being organic. And then the big advantage about being organic is that you have to spend a lot of time in the vineyard. You have to do a lot of manual work, and you have to check that everything is going like you want. So there's more human control in the vineyards, and this probably helps to make better grapes in the end too, because you're not in your office and you're not just following a chemical calendar which some sales rep is giving to you. You're really going in the vineyards every day and checking that everything is going fine. And then, of course, it's also an ethical decision for me. I mean, for the people who work every day in the vineyards, from the pruning to the selection of the buds to the harvest, for them, for sure, it's way more healthy to work in an organic vineyard than where you have chemical products. Yeah. And
one thing that absolutely delighted me, I have to say, when I not just in Chianti Classico, but I'm gonna actually reserve this comment for most of Italy at this point, is just the high number of organic wines that I'm seeing, all certified with the certification on the label in the back. And, you know, I mean, that's obviously a very clear message to consumers, but maybe even 5 years ago, I would say maybe 5% of my samples, you know, maybe less, I get 2 or 3% had that. Wow. And now even in Castellina in Chianti, I would say, I mean, if it wasn't 25 or 30% of all the, I mean, it was incredible how many wines were certified organic or biodynamic. So I mean, the change is phenomenal, and especially in Castellina, where, you know, because I noticed even a difference between the different comuni, or, you know, villages of Chianti Classico. Some a little bit slower, you know, with fewer producers that have embraced that, and others, it just, my God, it's incredible. Between neighbors, everybody must be sharing information, and it makes me very
probably
happy.
It's also the newer generation, which starts to, and then, I mean, there are so many changes. I mean, global warming at this point, I think it's not, I mean, if you ask a producer, is global warming happening? I mean, for us, it's not a question. I mean, we see it every day.
Right.
And so there's we are all more sensible. We are all taking more care of our environment. And it's a topic which is probably, especially for the younger generation, more and more important.
So just jumping back a second to the Gran Selezione, there was a question, can you automatically just change a wine from Riserva to Gran Selezione, was the question?
Yes, so the Gran Selezione, so the Riserva, technically speaking, for the Consorzio, has to age 24 months in the cellar. And it can be released basically 2 years after the harvest. And it's not, what is also a bit sad, I find, that in Chianti Classico, they don't say, the Consorzio doesn't say where you have to age it. So basically you can age a Riserva for 2 years in the bottle, and you could still try to label it as a Riserva, while in other appellations in Italy, Montalcino and so on, you have to age it at least a certain period in oak. This is in Chianti Classico, is not requested. And Gran Selezione, you have to age 30 months in the cellar. Again, it's not requested in what kind of container. And so to be Riserva, to be Gran Selezione, you have to send the sample to a panel, and the panel tastes the wine. So sometimes, just out of fun, we send both the Casanuova di Nittardi and our Riserva to the panel for the Gran Selezione to see if it passes, and they always pass.
They always pass.
So I think still today the level, I mean, it's not super strict, to be honest.
I mean, that's one of the things that, yeah, that surprises that there are a lot of wines that, that honestly, not a lot, but I mean, there are some that you wonder, why aren't they just Riserva? What makes this, I can't tell the difference between what would be Riserva or Gran Selezione. So I mean,
I don't want to talk bad, don't get me wrong.
No, neither do I. But
today is the level, but I mean, you should say that, not me, but I think today is the level of Chianti Classico, the average level is very, very high. Especially if you look at if you look at the price quality ratio, I think as an appellation we're doing quite fine.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that Chianti Classico is one of the great wine regions of Italy, and I say that more because of the potential of what we have yet to see. I mean, the work of the producers and the the coordination of your authorities at the Consorzio, and even the not always easy coordination between producers to get things going and to make changes, like even doing the Gran Selezione, still underlines an important need to to move towards an important quality identity. But I mean, it's just the breakdown of the region, the quality of the soils, of the exposures, of the hills, of the altitudes, the grapes used. I mean, it really is, and also Chianti Classico is not small. Montalcino is quite small in comparison,
yes.
And Chianti Classico just has more, more variability, and it's a very complicated and a very worthy wine region that is only really, showing its new modern side. Modern by I mean that in the way of, its quality driven side. So I have another question, Léon, that we had a couple of people have asked, and it's one of my favorite subjects.
Yes.
Is about food pairing. So we had somebody ask about, what are your food pairing? Obviously there is the classic bistecca alla fiorentina, which is the steak locally served, especially around Florence and also in province of Siena, which is this thick of a cut of meat. And then somebody else also asked about, do your wines pair with Asian foods? And I don't know if that's something that you have ideas as well about, or experience pairing with Asian foods.
So honestly, for me, as I was saying in the beginning a little bit, wine is a lot about sharing with people and about the convivial aspect of the experience. So I don't know if I'm not somebody who says you have to serve the wine with this thing and only red wine only with meat, white wine only with fish. I think this is a little bit, I think I'm very open to try different things. I think in general, Chianti Classico, Sangiovese, but maybe even more Chianti Classico than Brunello, is a very, very food-friendly wine because it has a great acidity, a great freshness, which was also all kind of a little bit fatter food, meat, but also salmon, refreshes the palate. And it's a wine which makes always una buona figura, a good impression on the table, I think, independently from what kind of food. Of course, I mean, there are some foods which are always very difficult to pair. Very spicy food is difficult. Sweet food is difficult. I mean, often in Asia, there's this mix of sweet and sour, sweet and spicy, which is not easy. And even if in Asia people mainly drink red wine, I think with these kind of foods, maybe some white wines, maybe with a little bit of residual sugar would work better. But I have been a few times to China, and I always, I mean, people like to drink Chianti Classico and Sangiovese with Chinese food. It always works. In the end, people are happy, and I think this is what it's all about.
And of course, you also have the wines for the Maremma property, so you have more structure. You have different grapes there, so you could even think of, Korean barbecue or fried pork, or the crunchy duck skin, from, I mean, there's
Peking duck. Yeah, that
exactly.
works. That works very good. That's true.
It works very
You're
well.
better than me in food and wine pairing.
Many years of experience there. Right? And also see that my friend Giuseppe was also suggesting, yes, I think it's pork and wild boar, of course, as well, because there's a lot of wild boar in Tuscany.
And I mean, Giuseppe was suggesting, he was writing in Italian that Gran Selezione has to come from grapes which are from the vineyard, from the producer. This is, of course, true. But again, it's not all, it's not a very strict rule, I think. I mean, for me, as a small producer, it's obvious that that a wine should come from the vineyards, from the producer. For me, it's rather obvious.
Right. So listen, so just as, because we're coming close to the end of the hour, but one last question. So if you were to describe, because this is something that I've been playing around with a lot in my own mind, the wines of Castellina, even to compare them to the other regions or the other villages of Chianti Classico, you have Rada, Gaiole, Castelnuovo Berardenga, you have, San Casciano and Val di Pesa. They're basically 7, I think. Well, now there's a bit of movement in Tavernelle.
Exactly, yes.
Right?
Now,
San Donato.
Exactly, San Donato.
San Donato, which is an exciting new thing that we'll be talking about in my next issue of the Wine Advocate. But so if you were to describe Castellina, where you are in Castellina, which is a little bit more on the kind of on the interior side, as you said, closer to Panzano, where some of the most classic wines are made in the appellation. What are some of the characteristics you would assign to Castellina? What makes the Castellina different in your mind?
So so 2 things. Old people in Castellina, old people from Chianti, always say Castellina is cold. So Castellina the village itself is very high, over 500 meters, nearly 600 meters. So it's probably the coldest village in Chianti Classico. But Castellina, the whole commune of Castellina is for me a little bit like a micro Chianti Classico. We have vineyards 200 meters high, right, and we have vineyards which are 550, 500, 600 meters high. So we have both extremes. We have very small producers, very big producers, which often look for more traditional and for more commercial style. So it's unfortunately, and it's difficult to say Castellina is just that, because it's so various. But if you ask me, say one word, I would it's not a style which is as fresh as Radda maybe, or many producers in Gaiole. So it's not all about acidity. It's more about a bit of a complete wine maybe. So the wines in Castellina often have a little bit more of body, have a little bit more of a round side. Maybe it's a little bit the influence from the sea that we have a little bit more, being rather west in the Chianti Classico area. Maybe it's that there are many open bowls in Castellina, so there's like a lot of sunshine.
Castellina Scalo, yeah, it's very open.
Exactly, Castellina Scalo, yes. So we are somewhere, it's not as a warm area as Castelnuovo Berardenga is, or many parts of San Casciano maybe, or it's a bowl of Panzano, which is very hot. So it's not that warm, but it's for sure not as fresh as Radda or Gaiole. So probably we are somewhere in the middle, I would say.
All right.
I know it's a bit of a political answer because I said everything and nothing. But
no, I mean, but it's true. Castellina is kind of, in a way, it's also it's kind of in the middle of the whole Chianti Classico appellation. It's the heart in a sense, because Castellina really does take up, I mean, it's right next to Rada. It's kind of, it borders with many other different villages. So you can always share the characteristics. I mean, compared to like Castelnuovo Berardenga, which is down in the south, and and it's very different because it's on average 2 or 3 degrees warmer there, and the soils are a little bit heavier and thicker. So I mean, Castellina, you're right. It's a little microcosm. I always think it's very classic wines too from Castellina, very classic expressions.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
you know, I mean, when some of them, when you really think of what Chianti Classico gives, and, you know, you get all those, you get it from Castellina for sure.
Because also, Castellina is rather close to Poggibonsi, which is outside of the Chianti Classico area, but it's kind of the industrial town of the area, and it's a bit of the reference point because it's the main bigger town in the area. And in Poggibonsi, it's a home of Giulio Gambelli, which was one of the first consultant winemakers and one of the big believers in Sangiovese. And he consulted many wineries in Castellina. So maybe this also made it a bit more of a classic area, as you said. Yeah.
Well, Leon, thank you so much for sharing this hour with us. Thank you to everyone for watching. It's been a pleasure to be with you as always. And thank you very much, Leon. It's been wonderful for teaching us more about Fattoria Nittardi and your different areas where you farm and everything. And I hope that people seek out your wines. And I hope to see you soon in Italy.
Great, yeah. Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed for another Cena, you know, in the Chianti Classico, you know, the Stazione Leopoldo. If they're going to still do that, we'll see.
I think next year.
Hopefully next year things will get back to normal. Again, so cheers and thank you very much.
Grazie Monica, grazie.
Grazie a te.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Ciao. Ciao. Ciao.